Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I'm Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
And we're with Creative Mind. And this is a Jungian podcast. And we talk about all things Jungian coaching as the founders of Creative Mind University and the Jungian Life Coach Training. And before we begin today, our topic is, we're continuing the topic of consciousness. And before we begin, I do want to remind you to subscribe to our channel if you are watching us on YouTube. If you are listening to us on podcast services, please don't forget to subscribe so you can get every episode.
Yep.
Okay.
All
So
right.
consciousness.
Yep.
We started last week. If you missed the episode last week, definitely check it out. But this one, I think we want to go a little deeper into what consciousness,
Right.
why we need to understand this non-dual consciousness.
Yeah, and the reason why it's important to understand non-dual consciousness is because all the sciences are moving in that direction. And we predict that pretty soon it will be the worldview. In other words, it's going to replace the old paradigm. So the old paradigm is pretty much a materialistic one, that the universe is made out of atoms, of matter, and that is the foundational reality. Now, there's a lot of movement towards understanding the universe in a more consciousness-directed way. That the universe is not actually made out of matter, it's actually made out of consciousness. And that's the non-dualism. And that's why we're talking about it, because we want coaching to be up to date with the latest science, both not only neuroscience, but quantum physics, as well as medicine and all the beautiful sciences.
So if you're a coach, you're wanting to be coached or wanting to get more coach training, you need to start learning about this non-dual consciousness or you'll be left behind. The materialistic point of view is that we have this individual body and our brain inside our skull that has this individual wiring, and that there's a world out there that's processing this information from the external world, this matter out there, and it's like learning how to cope and deal, and that, you know, our memories are solid and those things really happen the way we thought they happened, and all these assumptions about who we are, what we're made of, are going to be kind of tossed on its head. It's just like when everyone thought the world was flat. And then we realized, oh, the world is round. Although there are still some people thinking it's still flat. But we have a picture from space. We know it's round. But that's kind of the idea. It's like the whole world, the paradigm shifted when we started. And then that the sun revolved around the earth versus the earth revolved around the sun. I mean, that's what science is about. It's not that everything's fixed. It's that we keep evolving our understanding of the universe and what it is.
Yeah. So last time we talked about the foundation of consciousness as the universe, or as the foundation of reality, and that it's beyond the senses. In other words, we can't really understand consciousness as an object. If we're looking for an energy like electricity or something, or a lot of people in the West are looking for parts of the brain that they can say, here's the source of consciousness.
Or like I see people that think about epigenetics and like, I know what part of your genes you can turn on and off to get more money. It's just kind of silly. Yeah.
In non-dual philosophy, consciousness is beyond the senses, and therefore we cannot really perceive it through our senses. But we can experience it directly because we are consciousness. Right?
So it's not something to observe through our senses, but basically have an experience of.
Right. That's the beauty of it, that we're saying we cannot see it, experience it through our senses, but we can know it through self-realization, through realizing that we are consciousness. We are, and that indeed we are experiencing consciousness when we look at the world, and that's what we want to talk about now. Why does the world appear to us the way it does?
Why,
what
Rob?
does it mean? Right.
Tell us.
So in the Upanishads, which last time we mentioned also that it is the source of our knowledge, because it is not a religious or these books are not religious texts. They're more scientific in the way that they're approaching the study of consciousness. They're think about it this way: they were written by seers, or what they're called
The
rishis. They're seers. It translates as seers, which means they directly observed within themselves these truths, and then they came out and dictated them or chanted them or wrote them down, and that's how they came to us through the Upanishads. The Upanishads are essentially what the seers saw, and then what they reported to others, and that were thankfully written down, that now we have access to. So what these seers are saying is that consciousness is the true reality, the unchanging, permanent, fixed reality of our true nature also. And that the world is an appearance, very similar to the relationship between a dream and a dreamer. So who creates the dream? The dreamer does.
But Rob, I can touch this desk and it feels solid. You can tell me there's nothing here?
Not that there's nothing, there's something, right? But what is the nature of that something? That's what we're interested in.
So if a baby saw this object, they would not call it a desk. They wouldn't know what it was or what its function was because it didn't learn it yet. So we were learning through these objects what we...
Yeah, name and form, right? The name and the form give it kind of its function and its presence for us, right? As human beings, we define things through name and form. We see their shape and we give it a name, and then they become part of the world of objects that we perceive. The question is this: if we ask a seer, what is the nature of the world that I'm experiencing, right? The cities that I see, the experience at work and my relationships, my family, where is all that coming from and where does it exist? The seer would say, all those things exist, absolutely, but they exist as an apparent reality. In other words, it's appearing to us in our consciousness, in our awareness, and that's the only place they appear. Now, this is verifiable. Ask yourself, is there any other place or any other way that I perceive and experience the things in my life separate from consciousness, separate from awareness?
Separate from being aware or observation, right?
Yes, from that direct experience of the thing. Is there any other place that we experience the world? And the answer, as far as we know, is no. There's no other place. In other words, we cannot separate awareness from the world.
Well, and you know what's interesting? We talk about dreams too, that we have this awareness in dreams, and it's dreamlike. But then when we go into deep sleep, we lose all the senses, like everything just shuts down, and we kind of go within. We aren't even aware that we're in that deep sleep. Right. But when we wake up, we're aware that we were somewhere. We were aware that we were not aware. So it's still an awareness. Because we have this moment, deep parts of our night where we have no memory, but we're aware that we don't have a memory. So it's still an awareness.
Absolutely. So awareness is always there. It's always constant. That's why it's considered the absolute reality. Right? So awareness is the absolute reality. The appearance of the world, which is called Maya, is an apparent reality. It's an appearance. Now, it doesn't mean it's not real. It simply means that it's not
as real as we think it is, or we believe it to be.
Well, we can say it's dreamlike.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't say a dream is not real or that it didn't happen or that you didn't experience it.
They said if we slow down the vibration of our cells and we got really slow, we'd be blinking in and out of existence in a way, like
I don't know about
you know about that? Okay. But that idea that we seem solid, like if you look at a rock and it seems solid, but it's actually, if you look under a microscope, it's moving. So we don't know. And so what does this have to do with personal growth, and why is this so important to coaching? Is because if we're coaching from a place of your client is separate from the events in their life and they just have to think positive, and then those positive things will help them feel better and then change their behavior so they can change their results. That's a very mechanical way of dealing, and maybe like kind of the outcome, the surface part of what they're experiencing. But if we go deeper and say, well, whatever's out there is part of them already, so it's less I got to go out and make it happen versus where do I shift my mind to make it create what I want.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, let's say, the basic situations that we run into is that people project their power externally. They think the appearance of the world, right? The world that I see holds the key to power, to happiness, to love. It's out there. It's in the relationships, in the money, in the success that are to be had out there. If I go out there and get it, then I will be happy. In other words, they're putting the cause of their happiness externally. They're projecting it and saying it's out there. The seers would say that's the wrong sequence. Happiness comes from within. It's you.
So like that's the cause. Where the cause is the saying.
Cause is in consciousness. Everything is arising from consciousness. Therefore, if you seek happiness, fulfillment, success, you have to find it within yourself first.
Well, I know for me, when I was single, I was looking for love. Where is love? And it's like you have to love it. Like you have to know the love in yourself so you can see the love in the world. If you feel rejected and unhappy and unattractive and unloved, that's what you're going to see in the world. And so it's always a mirror versus the causes outside of you. Now, I love this story of the rope and the snake, because that really shows this idea of like what we're looking at can be very tricky, and how we see things is very tricky. So imagine you're walking into a dark closet, you turn on the light and you see what appears to be a snake, and you jump and you get scared. And then you look closer and you realize, oh, it's just a rope. But immediately your mind, because what it does, it goes into survival. What usually our brain, the first thing it does is look for danger. So it's going to find something and align it with danger more than what really is there, just from a survival perspective. And then when we see it's a rope, we relax. Now, was it a rope or a snake? It was both, because you had the experience of it being a snake. You had the emotion of it being a snake. So that's, even though it wasn't, you had the emotion of that. And so we do that all the time with life. We project something, we think it's real, like a person's a certain way or a situation's a certain way. And we react to it. And that's what creates, what we're thinking we're creating our reality, but we're kind of overlaying our meaning onto it.
That's right.
And creating this these states within us based on our past and what we are afraid of, what our big fears are.
Our big fears, we know this from neuroscience, that our brain is the one that's constructing what we call our reality. It's essentially a mental experience. So the color, the shape, the sensation, the meaning of things. So, for example, if I see a snake, the meaning for me is be careful, right? This is a dangerous or possibly a dangerous situation. All that is arising in the mind and is experienced in the mind. Now, the brain makes it appear as if the reality is what I'm perceiving, and that the reality holds those elements. I mean, in essence, we're thinking there's an external reality that is independent of my mind, that is separate and independent. And that is not the case. Not even in science, in hard science, that is not the case. We are creating our experience very actively through our mind, through our brain, and that's what we call our reality. Now, the seer simply said, if If that reality is subject to interpretation, meaning that you might interpret the
I might have
scene,
seen a rope and not, because I'm not afraid of snakes and I don't have that.
And some people might have a snake phobia that are really afraid of it. Like they would run, out of the house.
And someone may not even, like a baby would not even know what a snake was, would play with it, thinking, oh, there's a little toy
they
here.
would say that's a transactional reality. In other words, the true meaning and the reality of that experience is not out there. The mind, it's in the mind. It's in the processing that your brain does, and then creating that reality for yourself. So it's a transactional, apparent reality. It's useful for us, of course, because that's where we find food and shelter, and we do things, and we experience the world. But it's very much an apparent reality.
Just like the same reality as a dream. We have these worlds that we live in, these problems we're trying to solve, these places we're traveling. It's the same thing. And so, I think a lot of people would say, and I know I said this when I first heard this, is like, so nothing matters. Nothing matters. If everything's an illusion, nothing matters. And, I could just go and, be an axe murderer and it doesn't matter because it's not real. What would you say to that? Like this, if it's not real, then why even be born? Why do we have this life?
Yeah.
Deep philosophical question.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because many people misinterpret these teachings in that way. What the Upanishads teach is that this apparent reality, even though it is an apparent reality, right? It's not the absolute reality, is very much a part of or emanating from the absolute reality, pure consciousness. It is, again, the relationship between the dream and the dreamer, right? So if you say, does the dream have any function? Is it useful to me to have a dream? Create this, all this worlds, buildings and cars and other people in my dream experience. What's the point of that? The only real function that it has is kind of a play, kind of a use of our imagination, the creative power within us.
So there's a creative power within us, and not, when we say us, not like our ego, not our conscious personality, but deep within us, that we're connected to something greater that created the universe, created the stars and the earth and all that, which is connected to us. Yeah. And that we're in this world that this bigger being created, but it's us, we're seeing ourselves. And so that makes more sense to people, that it's not that it's not real, but that it's not as real. Like you said, it's an apparent reality. And what most people do is they want to change one apparent reality to another. Like, I'm in an apparent reality of being single. I want to be in a new apparent reality of being a couple. I want to be one apparent reality of being poor, and this new reality of being a rich person, like we were talking in the last episode of The King. It's like those apparent realities aren't really what defines us. What's the truth is that unchanging ground, that pure consciousness. That's who we are, that depth. And then we're capable of all that imagination. So imagine if you're the same substance as this intelligence that created all this apparent reality, what can you create? Like, you're a part, that's a part of you. So that would be, when people talk about, oh, you're unlimited and you can create what you want in your life, that's where this comes from, these deeper lessons and teaching.
And of course we get to this question, if it's an apparent reality, is the suffering that people feel real? Like if you see that snake, for example,
and you had panic,
there's a panic, there's a fear. Is that fear and panic real to you? Yes.
And can it be stored in my body, and I have a traumatic experience that every time I open the closet, I'm going to have a little tentativeness to turning on that light because I'm going to see, like, it's a warning. But the biological system that we have is built for survival. So it's going to build in those mechanisms for us.
Yes. And then the seers explain that there are levels of awareness, or in other words, of realization of these deeper truths. So that as we begin to understand, we might experience the suffering as very real, but that through practice, as we realize the true nature of all these experiences, that we start to free our minds from even the suffering. But in the beginning, right, we have to hold this idea that people are suffering because of their misperception of the world. In other words, it says something like this: you mistake the unreal for the real, and the real for the unreal. We're misperceiving the world. And in misperceiving the world, we suffer. That creates our suffering. So it's explaining the nature of human suffering. Where does it come from? It comes from our misperception of the world, our misunderstanding of the apparent reality, which is Maya, that we get caught up in it. It's almost like being caught up in a dream, being chased by a bear, for example, in a dream, and you think, my life is going to end, right? And you begin to experience sadness, and you feel like you're going to leave your family behind, and you're going to miss out on the rest of your life. All that is suffering in a way. That's what we are experiencing in this waking life as well. That we get caught up in the apparent reality, in the transactional reality, and we think it's real, or we think it's the absolute reality. And that's not the case. Once we understand its nature, it begins to liberate us from our suffering.
And so from a coaching perspective, if you're a coach in the material world, you will buy into the fact that these problems are real to the client. And it's almost disempowering, because then, yeah, you're right. You have these terrible things that happen to you. You have this terrible situation you're in. And the type of work that we do is questioning those things, not to whitewash it, and not to, try to what's that called? Gaslight people and say, you're not really feeling that. It's not about that. It's about acknowledging the feelings, but having them question that reality. We've all had that experience where we text someone that we love and we send them a note, and we may be joking around, and then they don't respond. And you try to call them, they don't answer. And you start to think, ooh, maybe I said something wrong to this person, and they're really mad at me. And we create this world in our mind of what that person's thinking, what they're doing, and all part of our survival mechanisms. And then they call a couple hours later and they say, sorry, I missed it. I love the joke, but I was in like a massage and I couldn't answer my phone. But you're in that state, that's an experience, but it wasn't a real reality. You were on your own reality, making meaning to something that did not have a meaning.
Yeah. So this knowledge, this understanding, and again, not only an intellectual understanding of these principles, but a realization, in other words, a direct shift of perception, of experience, where you start to realize that this is indeed the nature of the world. The things that I'm experiencing in the world are part of the apparent reality, dreamlike, ever shifting, ever changing. What it does, it starts to reduce the anxiety, the existential fear that we have of death, of impermanence, and we start to be more comfortable and more realistic about what we expect from the world.
And then, so some of the things, implications is that if we learn that this is an apparent reality, we're less afraid.
Less afraid.
It reduces suffering because we see that we can create something else. We don't feel powerless.
And we're able to engage with the world in a more creative way.
Yeah.
That we're not as afraid of doing things that we feel would help the world and be a more creative response to the world. It's
almost like if you think about an actor and they get a scene and they get to play it out many different times and they try on different ways of doing that character. That's what we can do with our life. We can keep trying again, take two, and molding and creating our life from this kind of fresh place where we're not fixed and have a fixed reactive response to everything.
Yes. And finally, the Upanishads mention this very clearly, that once you start to see everything as the self, identical to yourself, right? Which is your pure consciousness, your pure awareness, and you start to see everyone and everything as your consciousness, then you start to not be aggressive, not be hateful, not be
more compassionate,
wanting to destroy things, or hating people or anything like that, because you're understanding the true nature of reality. So it's a powerful experience. That's why it's often associated with spirituality and religion. But again, from my or our perspective, the Upanishads are not religion in the traditional sense. They're more like a...
Religions use the Upanishads, yes, but the way we use it is more philosophical guidelines.
Yes, more like higher knowledge. They're higher knowledge, meaning it's knowledge that's instructing us on the true nature of ourselves.
And even just reading small texts. I remember when I first started, I was trying to get a book deal, and I was, traveling a lot, meeting with editors and trying to get a publishing deal, meeting people, traveling, going to coaching conventions and speaking conventions. And I always carried the Gita around with me. And it's like this distillation of the Upanishads, like the Cliff Notes. And I remember just opening up a page and seeing there's no difference between success and failure, gold and pot of clay. And it just kind of clears your mind and brings you back to a new perspective. And I think another question before we go, just one quickly, is that people think that you'll lose that passion of life if nothing matters, or if it doesn't have like that intensity or that stress, or, if we don't have the suffering, then will we be kind of numb, boring, flat, emotional people?
No, that's not the case. It's the opposite, because like we were saying, then that frees you up to really take risk and experience life in all its facets. And then you start to appreciate the diversity. My God, what is the brilliance of this intelligence that creates the universe, which is the self. And you see how creative it is. It just keeps on creating and is inexhaustible, right? Inexhaustible.
And we can really feel even the suffering and the joys in a deep, meaningful way, because we understand their nature, versus even pushing away the suffering, like being afraid to make a mistake, being afraid to go into a dark place. Like you can go into and be like, let's see what's inside here, and you're not afraid. And I think that's the key. And that's if we're not afraid of the darkness, we won't be fearing the light either. Because some people feel like, if I'm too happy, it's going to be taken away from me. And it's like less like a kind of limiting ourselves in such a small little breath of what we can express ourselves. We can have this huge repertoire of emotion and adventure in our life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not about sitting in a cave and meditating, although that helps sometimes to contemplate these things. But it's about living a full, enlightened life. So next week, we're going to talk about being one with everything. Again, some more non-duality, more of the Brahman aspects of the Upanishads, of the divine. And should be a juicy topic next week. So don't forget to join us. And until then, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're watching us on YouTube, or subscribing to our podcast wherever you're listening to it, so you can get all the rest of the series.
Yes. See you next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.